Hi, welcome to the A to Z of Writing Language Learning Materials. In this video, we're going to take a quick look at Q is for questions. Now, as a teacher or a materials writer, what type of questions do you ask? Well, you probably ask lead-in questions. You probably ask comprehension questions like yes/no questions or what questions like what, where, when. Questions where you have to maybe read a text and check your understanding. Questions where you perhaps listen to somebody and you answer questions. A lot of the questions we ask are checking comprehension. You can go higher. You can do things like ask the students, why do you think? Or do you agree with the speaker? And then often at the end of the class, we might ask personalization questions. We might even give the students can-do questions, like, having done this lesson, can you use the past simple? Can you write a report? Now, when it comes to questions, it's quite interesting to consider how many you ask in the typical lesson. Let's take a look at some research. Now, there was a study done that was reported in a book once where they recorded a variety of teachers asking questions in the classroom. They discovered from the recording that on average, the typical teacher asks about 2 questions per minute. That's 400 questions per day. Now, of course, maybe half those questions were just classroom management questions like, can you sit down? Can you stop talking? Did you do your homework? Where's your book? And so on. So we can discount those questions, but that still leaves another 200 questions that the teacher's asking related to language learning. When they analysed the types of questions, they were struck that the majority of those questions were lower order thinking questions. They were checking questions. They were yes/no questions. In one study, only 4%, and in another study, 8%. So between 4 and 8% of the questions actually encouraged higher order thinking. So questions that were involved in developing critical thinking skills or maybe developing creativity. And the other thing they noticed was that on average, the typical student only got to ask 1 question per lesson. And that question might, again, it might have been a classroom management type question, like, can you repeat the answer to number 5? What page are we on? It wasn't necessarily a question that was developing higher order thinking. So what can we do about it? This photo comes from a real lesson. It was a lesson about an elephant sanctuary in northern Thailand. Now, the woman in the picture is someone quite famous. She's called Lek Chairlet, and there was a film made about her called Love and Bananas. It's a fantastic film, bit distressing in parts, so be careful, particularly in the first 10 minutes of the film. But it's about how she created an elephant sanctuary with these beautiful elephants. Now, the students are going to read a text about her, but before they read the text, they're going to see the photo, and the teacher's going to ask them questions. Now, we could ask simple leading questions like this. This is quite typical. What can you see in the photo? So we can check students can describe what they can see. And in this particular photo, the colours are quite strong. So what colours can you see? And it's an opportunity for the teacher to recycle colours. But they're both lower order thinking questions. They're just checking. There's not much higher order thinking going on. What can we do just to push the questions up a little? Well, we could get students to speculate with the why question. Why is the woman with the elephant? How do you think they feel? How do you think they both feel? Do they like each other, for example? Students could speculate about the relationship between them. You could also tell the students that the photo comes from a real elephant sanctuary in Thailand. You probably have to explain the word sanctuary. You might have to translate it or give them a definition and make sure students understand what the word sanctuary means. If you really want to increase their higher order thinking and get their creativity going, you could ask them to imagine the photos from an advert And can they write a slogan to go with the advert? This is getting students to use their creative thinking skills. Now remember, in the previous study that I showed you the results, the majority of questions we usually ask are lower order thinking, checking questions. What we're doing here is trying to increase the number of higher order thinking questions. And remember that last point from the study, it said that the average student only got to ask maybe one question per lesson, and it wasn't necessarily higher order thinking. So with a photo like this, you can say to the students, can you write a question for the woman? And the students might write 3 questions for the woman. What's your name? Where are you from? Why did you start the sanctuary? And then they could get together with a partner student and do a role play. One of them ask the questions, one of them pretend to be the woman. They would be using some higher order creative thinking there. The other thing that you could do, and I only discovered this by chance when a student once decided not to write questions for the person but write it for the animal, you can say to the students, write a question for the elephant. And if you want to have a little bit of fun, students can role play an interview with the questions, and one of them can pretend to be the elephant giving answers. Just a reminder that many of the ideas on this channel are also summarized in our book, The A to Z of Writing Language Learning Materials, now available. If you go to our website, writingeltmaterials.com, you'll find details of how to get a copy of this book. And for example, you'd look up Q is for questions.